Hi, I'm B for Nick's Mechanics, and in today's video, we're going to start making part 1 of my Transformers 40th Anniversary Blender animation. Gosh, that's a lot of syllables. So, what is this project? Well, it is the 40th anniversary of the Transformers, and I want to make an animation that celebrates it. All major aspects of the brand, I want to incorporate into one animation. Right off the bat, I'm just going to mention that this video is a part 1 because we have a lot to do, and I'm not going to be able to cover all in one video. So what's the idea that I have for this animation? How am I going to incorporate all the bits together? Well, it's going to start with a kid in the 80s playing with the vintage toys, where it all began. Then he gets called off screen, and the toys come to life, and they start fighting. And now, the cool part happens. With every major punch, swing of the sword, shot of the gun, the models transition into the main leaders of the next continuity. So it'll go from the toys, to the cartoon, to the comic books, the later seasons, every major leader. This is mostly just Optimus Prime and Megatron, but the focus is on the leaders, not the characters. So even though there's a Rescue Bots Optimus Prime, I'm going to choose Heatwave for that show because he's the leader. Now, with an animation like this, I would probably upset people if I chose a winner, so the best way I figured to end it is that it ends with Earthspark. And as they, finish up their fight, camera zooms out, and it shows that same kid from the start, all grown up, playing with his kid. So, since this is a part 1, I'm going to give you a rundown of all of the work and all of the continuities and everything that I plan to include. So here's the rundown of every continuity I plan on showing in my animation. Obviously, we're starting with the G1 toys with Optimus and Megatron. Then we move to the first season of the 80s cartoon with Optimus Prime and Megatron again. Then with the comic books, we go from Optimus Prime to Galvatron. Then we move on to Season 3 with Rodimus Prime and Galvatron again. Headmasters with Fortress and Scorponok. Super God Master Force with Jinrai and Overlord. Victory with Starsaber and Deathsaurus. G2 Laser Prime and Megatron. Beast Wars, Optimus Primal and Megatron. Beast Wars 2nd with Lio Convoy and Galvatron. Beast Wars Neo with Big Convoy and Magmatron. Beast Machines with Optimus Primal and Megatron again. Car Robots with Fire Convoy and Scourge. Armada with Optimus Prime and Megatron. Dreamwave with Optimus Prime and Megatron. Alternators with Optimus Prime and Megatron. You're going to be hearing those names a lot. Energon, Optimus and Megatron. Cybertron, Optimus and Megatron. IDW 2005 with Optimus Prime and Autobot Megatron. Shattered Glass, Optimus and Megatron. Animated. Who do you think I'm gonna do? Yeah, it's Optimus and Megatron. Same with the Bayverse first film, and the War for Cybertron video game, and Transformers Prime. Then we start changing it up a little bit with Rescue Bots Heatwave versus Morbot. Then we go back to Optimus and Megatron with Creo, and Angry Bird Transformers. For a change, we got Rid 15, Bumblebee, and Steeljaw, and then we go to Devastation with Optimus Prime and Megatron, the Prime Wars cartoon series with Optimus and Megatron again, Cyberverse 2018 with Optimus and Megatron, Rescue Bots Academy with Hotshot and Laserbeak. Laserbeak's like the only Decepticon that really shows up. IDW 2019 with Optimus Prime and Megatron. The War for Cybertron Netflix cartoon with Optimus and Megatron. Rise of the Beasts with Optimus and Scourge. Skybound with Optimus and Megatron. And Earthspark with Optimus and Megatron. So as you can see, it's mostly going to be Optimus and Megatron, which will add to some nice transitions, but we are including other characters. It's the main leaders, it's just that with every reboot, it's usually Optimus versus someone. Now, since the idea is the toys come to life and whatever, the background is going to stay mostly the same, and it's set in the living room. And because of that, I can very easily integrate other members of the Transformers community into my animation. See, I've been part of the Hobbies with Jose Discord server for quite a while now, and when I first started talking about how many models I had to make, I got some offers to say, hey, I know a little bit of Blender, I can help you out. But I actually thought that that would make it a little bit harder because I'd also be managing people while also modeling some of them myself. So unfortunately, I had to say no, but I didn't want to. I wanted other people part of this animation. It's the 40th, right? And then I realized that a lot more of the people there are either 3D and 2D or just 2D. So I put a call out, and I'm gonna get some cool fan art to put in the posters and picture frames in the background. It's all early days yet, so nothing to show off just yet, and we still need to figure out some of the terms, conditions, and things like that, but hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, we're gonna get some sick fan art in the background, and I'm really excited to show some of that off. But what work have I actually done on the animation besides from planning? Well, I made 20 of the 74 models. Now, you would think that I would go from, like, chronological first to last, but I actually went with what I figured would be easiest. So, I started with the G1 cartoon Optimus Prime. These are all modeled inside of Blender 3D, and I'm doing things like mirror modifiers, subdivision surface, things like that. If you want a more in-depth explanation of the modeling process, check out some of the many other videos I've got on this channel talking about it. In fact, my last video was talking about it pretty well. Now, one thing with these models is they do not transform. I know, ironic, the Transformers 40th anniversary, none of them transform. Well, that's because it would actually double the amount of models I need to make. And 148 models does not sound great to me. Because the way I make models like this to make them look good is you have to make the vehicle mode first, and then you cut it up and make it into the robot. So it's like 2 major stages. And if you do that for every single character, and a lot of them turn into things that are not exactly easy to do, then you got a lot more work cut out for yourself for something that's gonna show up for such a brief period of time. So I decided that seeing as this is a fighting animation, I'm just gonna stick to the robot modes. Nothing says I can't tweak the models later on down the line for individual animations. I am reusing these models, I'm putting a lot of effort in. But for this one, it's just gonna be the fighting robots. So G1 Optimus was easy enough, and then I could just straight up recolor him into Shattered Glass Optimus. These are fully rigged with IK in the legs, and some of them have IK in the arms if they're sword wielders and they need to have that better flow. Once I'd finished the recolor, it was time to move on to remixing. So G1 Optimus became Dreamwave Optimus with a bit of proportion change. I know it's notorious for having slightly weird proportions in the comics, so I kind of just lent into that a bit to make it a bit more obvious. The idea of this animation having the characters flip between models every few seconds means that it needs to be kind of a, "Oh, it's that one," immediately. I don't want you to have to guess, it needs to just read immediately which version it is. Once I'd sorted Dreamwave, it was time for the Machinima cartoon, because that's just G1 Optimus with extra details. Actually more than I was expecting, and it took me a little bit of time, but it was mainly just in the knees and shoulders and stuff, so it didn't take me too long. Then finally Devastation was the last one I could remix nicely, and he was actually pretty hard. You see, detail-wise, it's just G1 Optimus but with slightly different proportions and mouth play. But in the video game, his cell shading textures don't adapt to light. What I mean by that is that if you look at my G1 cartoon Optimus, if I move the lamp around him, the cell shading highlights sort of adapt to the light. That makes sense, right? But Devastations don't, they stick on place. He still gets lighter and darker, but it's almost like the cell shading is sort of printed onto him. So I basically had to do just that. I went into Procreate, I drew every single cell shaded texture by hand, then I would import them as PNG into Blender as a material texture, and I would stretch them over the model. Then with the Principled BSDF, he still gets that standard shading of dark to light, but he keeps the highlights in the same spot. It doesn't really make sense in a single frame image like this, but in animation, trust me, it's gonna read a lot more obvious. Now I've run out of easy G1 Optimus remixes, so let's move on to some of my older Blender models and remix those. That Hot Rod model I made and showed off in my test animations a little while back, he got his proportions slightly shifted and his textures changed to become Rodimus Prime. Then Starscream in that same test animation became Skybound Starscream, with some slight color tweaks and extra lines added here and there. If you just make planes that are slightly offset, the line art modifier that I use actually sort of goes around it and covers it, so it just looks like extra lines. Especially on things like the cockpit and stuff, which hides it really well. Then, one that I didn't show off on the YouTube channel, but I was trying to make a 3D printed Angry Birds Optimus at one point. I thought it would be really funny to do like a Legacy Universe one, but I never really finished it. So I took that model, stripped all the 3D printed joints and replaced them with animation ones, actually gave him legs for once, and we had Angry Birds Optimus Prime. Yes, I'm treating each universe as seriously as the other. And now, here on out, every single model is gonna be so much harder. I've got maybe like a handful of other models that I can recolor from each other, but for the most part, every model's gonna have to be made from the ground up. So that's fun. To kick off, I wanted to do the G1 Optimus Prime toy. I mean, it's gonna start off the animation, he needs to be sorted and done well. Thankfully, there was an awful lot of reference material out there, the toy's been out for a while and plenty of people reviewed him, but he's got an awful lot of complex curves and details I didn't quite realize, so it took me a bit longer than the others. Also, getting his metallic materials to look nice in Blender was a bit tricky, and I'm still not 100% happy with it, but good enough is good enough for me. 74 models, I cannot be down in the depths trying to tweak it perfectly. Next up, a slightly easier one, was the 80s Marvel Comics Optimus Prime. I chose to base him off his Power Master mode because I'm a Matrix Quest kid, and that's how I always remember him. I know he had one that looked more like the 80s cartoon, and one that looked more like the G1 toy, but I think most people remember Power Master because he had it for such a long period of time. I also used Joey Carlino's 2D style materials in the 3D animation video to get cool halftone comic dot effects that could adapt to the lighting, really selling that older comic feel. Then, with a simple head redesign and cel-shaded redeco, I could turn him into Jinrai. That's what I mean, I still have some models I could recolor, but for the most part I have to make a new model to then recolor. After Jinrai, I decided to do Optimus Primal. Now, I was quite intimidated to do him because I'm not used to doing organic shapes in Blender. Usually I'm like, you know, Bricky Boxman robot, but Optimus Primal, Beast Wars, they're a mix of techno organic, which means that I have to somehow blend it pretty well. For Optimus Primal, I could basically just get him good enough, slap a fur texture on it, and I was good to go. This was using the hair particle simulation, which I've not used ever, so the fact that I got it pretty decent on my first go, I was very chuffed. Now this does make him very laggy because he's got so many hair particles, so when I animate, I'm actually going to have to shave him, animate that model, and then copy the keyframes onto the hair version once I've got it how I want. That way, it only lags when I go to render. Next up was an even harder one. I know, I thought you just said organic shade is hard. Yeah, try turning the Transformers animated style into 3D. This cartoon was not made for 3D. I don't know how they did it in the toy so well, but doing it in Blender was a pain. Awful lot of curves and trying to get the proportions exaggerated but not too much that look weird. Because the thing with animated style is that you draw each individual frame, so you make it good for each individual frame. With 3D animation, you have one shot to make one model that will look good in every single frame you want to use it for. With minor tweaking here and there with shape keys and stuff, but for the most part that's how it works. So, an awful lot of tweaking and trying, and actually chucking it in the Discord a lot to get opinions from the animated fans. Again, I like animated, but I've not seen a lot of it, so I needed people who were diehard fans of that show to tell me if I'd got it right or not. After that tricky model, I decided I'd give myself a bit of a break and work on Creo Optimus Prime. This guy was pretty basic, but I decided to make it a little bit more difficult for myself by adding some cool scuff textures into it with bump nodes and things. You cannot see them from far away, all it does is just make the renders take longer, but when it's up close you can see them and it just adds a bit more texture to them, which I love. And eventually when I do Megatron, I can just change the helmet and redeco him, and that'll be most of the work done. Alrighty, now it's time for Fortress. Now this is the one time where I break my no transformations rule because I thought it would be nice to have him go from his mini mode and then connect to his Transtector. So I modeled his face first for the big mode, and then I would just strap a little robot man on the back of that. Once he was fully rigged up and ready to go, then I would make the rest of his Transtector. Now a cool thing about this model is that I figured out that child of constraints work with bones, which means that when I line up his mini form directly where the head should be, and I just say, oi, you are now a child of that bone, and you can animate and keyframe that, it basically means that I can digitally glue the two models together. I even did a little test animation to show you what I mean, and basically it just means that they connect together, and it's really useful for animating. Plus, I'd never done anything like this before, so the fact that it worked first try made me very happy. Okay, so now we're on to Laser Prime. Now, I was surprised to find out that he never had one of those classic 90s commercials they did. You know, with the early CGI that everyone sort of references like, oh, look how goofy it is, but it was like technologically the best thing they'd ever done at that point. Laser Prime never got one of those. They did one for the G2 re-release of the G1 toy, and they did one for the Heroes Optimus Prime with the pump action rocket. But they never did one for Laser Prime, so I figured I would make mine look like that. After 30 years, he finally gets to look like the other commercials. And, as some of you may have realized, it's very easy to redeco him into Scourge for Red 2001. I was gonna do Gigatron originally, but after some debating in the Discord, I decided that Scourge would probably be not only easier, but also more fun. He's a sword-wielding evil copy of Optimus. I mean, that would be fun in the animation. From this point forth, I want to start going more chronological so that it's easier for you guys to follow in the videos, so I need to finish off my Japanese leaders, meaning I gotta do Star Saber next. There was not a lot of great reference art for him, and what I mean by that is that I prefer front-on ornographic pictures, or at least as close to as I can get. Star Saber has a lot of those in toy form, but I wanted the anime. In the end, I had to do a bit of blending of both, and I think I got it pretty close. He's maybe a bit more bulky than he should be, but considering that it's Saber in the Star Saber armor, I think that works. And for his head, I was able to actually copy-paste it from Scourge, which is great because I'm able to start reusing assets. You might notice that in my little right-hand side, I've got a folder called the Basics, and that is basically shapes that I use pretty regularly with the modifiers already applied and ready to go. That's mirror modifiers, shade smooth, all that stuff, so that when I go to make a new model, I can just copy-paste stuff. I mean, like, every Optimus Prime usually has a little crest on his helmet, or mouth plates, or things like that, so I'm able to just cobble together new models from these pre-existing parts, and it just shaves off a couple hours of fiddling. Alrighty, time to bring you to my most latest model, which is Lio Convoy. And he is easily the hardest one I had to do. You know how I was talking about Beast Wars ones being tricky with organic shapes? It's even harder when you're trying to use the grease pencil line art modifier with it. You know why? Because it basically works like an edge detect. And when you've got curved organic shapes that don't really have obvious edges like a rigid cube, it doesn't want to play nice. Plus, I also have to use an awful lot of subdivision surface modifiers and proportional editing to make things like a lion face. Yeah, I had to sculpt an animal in like a really short time. The lion face, while not perfect, is good enough, and I think the rest of him is actually one of the most accurate models I made. Plus, I did nearly all of him in a day. I could not have done that at the beginning of this project. These kind of shapes and stuff I was just not used to working with, but the fact that I started from easiest to hardest has meant that I've upped my skills in such a short amount of time. So I've been working on these models and planning the animation and stuff for just over a month now. I know, 20 models in a month is decent, but also probably not gonna make the deadline. I'm fully aware of that, and I'm willing to accept that even if just I got all the models finished by that time period, and then I upload the animation at a later date, I'm cool with that. Either way, this animation will eventually be finished, and it will eventually be posted. I just might not be able to do it as quick as I'd like because I have so much work to do. But I'm still going to be posting work in progress videos like this one, and I'm also going to be posting work in progress screenshots of the models as I go in the Hobbies with Jose Discord channel. So feel free to check me out there, and if you want to get any of your fan art submitted like the fellow people on there, then feel free to just DM me on Discord. I'm more than happy to have a chat and we'll work things out. As long as it's Transformers related, I don't mind. I also don't care what continuity, if it's traditional or digital. If you can send it over Discord, I'm willing to have a look at it and see if I can include it. Now, I think that about does it for this video, so make sure you subscribe for part 2, hopefully coming sometime soon, we'll see, and I'll see you then. Farewell!